I'm Matt Carey, documentary editor at Deadline. We have for you now a very moving, powerful film from Prime Video. It is For Love and Life, No Ordinary Campaign. And we are joined by director Christopher Burke and by producer Tim Rummel. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Matt. Appreciate it.
Great to see you again. Saw the film initially at South by Southwest. This is the story of Brian Wallock and his wife Sandra. Brian, a prominent attorney, worked with the Obama campaign and a really brilliant guy, an athlete earlier in his life, who at the age of 37 was diagnosed with ALS, which of course is this fatal, really devastating motor neuron disease. And remarkably, he was able, despite this tremendously challenging illness, to found the organization I Am ALS and really have a huge impact on research into ALS.
When Brian was diagnosed and I was working at that time at Bain & Company, I had almost no interest in doing another consulting case. I wanted to get involved with ALS. So I was looking at every, early stage biotech company out there.
Hi, Pete. What are you doing?
Just doing some late night research. But Brian being Brian was just operating on a whole different wavelength. Brian was thinking about, how do I orchestrate this entire disease category in a way which benefits everyone in this space?
There is a reason to be hopeful, but hope alone doesn't actually get you a cure. If you want to defeat ALS, you need everyone who is in the fight working together to do it. From the clinician making the diagnosis, to the patient who is living with it, to the family member, to the researcher, to the biotech pharma company, that is what will ultimately help us win this fight.
And so I turned to Sandra and said, I think I want to start an ALS nonprofit, and her response was, no.
I did tell Brian that was a terrible idea, and I didn't want to do it. I had been the founding executive director of 2 nonprofits. I knew how all-consuming that was, and so when we were diagnosed and we had a newborn and a 2-year-old and we were floored by the news, the last thing I wanted was all that work. And he ignored me, like he always does.
I spent about 7 months flying around the country, going to every doctor, every clinic, every patient, and asking them what's missing from the fight.
I remember the first day someone told me, you have to meet this guy. He's going to change the world of ALS. And he did.
And Christopher and Tim, how did you meet Brian and Sandra?
So Brian was my old friend from college. And, as often happens, you sort of semi-lose touch with people over the years, but you check in every now and then. And I hadn't heard from him in a while. And in 2018, I heard from him about this diagnosis. He reached out to a bunch of us from college and let people know. Mm-hmm. And I think the natural instinct when you hear something like that from an old friend is you want to help, right? Not being a, advanced neurosurgeon or anything, I couldn't help in the medical way, but I kind of raised my hand and said, hey, this is what I do, this being filmmaking, production. And if there's ever anything I can do to help, let me know. And a few months later, I got a call from him and said, hey, I want to take you up on that. I'm launching a nonprofit. We need a launch spot. Can you come out to Chicago like tomorrow and shoot this thing? And of course, the answer was yes. And it's been, several years since then of saying a lot of yeses to Brian and Sandra and following this movement through to where it is today, which has just been an absolutely amazing experience.
You certainly have some remarkable people involved with the film at every level, including producers, Katie Couric, who I met last year at South by Southwest for the premiere, Phil Rosenthal, people know from Everybody Loves Raymond, brilliant writer, producer, and Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, his wife Priscilla Chan, who are, of course, Meta, Facebook, and also have the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is involved in the film. But Tim, how are you able to assemble such a team to complete this project and really give it the prominence it deserves?
Well, in one way, it's been easy because of Brian and Sandra and their story, right? It's so moving and so inspirational to people that people, when they come across them, decide they want to get involved and come on board. So, it's been a journey making the film. It started with Chris just shooting a launch spot, and then, me seeing what he was making and feeling like, boy, there's a bigger story to tell here, and encouraging him to keep capturing as much as he could. But then as it kept going and we kept filming more and more, it started to, get its own momentum, and people just kept jumping on board.
President Obama, I should add, is in the film, part of the film. That cannot be easy to get the president's time. Harder to book an interview with the president or with Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan?
Both were challenging, but we got them done, yeah.
And Priscilla Chan makes a really important observation in the film, I think, which is that the reality is that there are many, many diseases that deserve attention, need funding desperately. It's a sort of competition for funding. But to give sufficient research money to ALS also impacts research and understanding into, for instance, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and related conditions. And so it's something that really benefits a huge slice of humanity. And she says in the film that rare diseases are often windows into biology. They can tell you a very specific thing about how the human body works. And I think that's part of the key to the campaign of I am ALS, is that any advances we make in understanding ALS are going to have an impact on other serious diseases and conditions.
Yeah, and I'd add that that's what we hope the film does for people as well, because really, when you see Brian and Sandra in their story, you see what they were able to do with ALS, but there are people who are facing equally terrible diagnoses and communities of patients who can, I think, take the lessons that we see in the film and apply them to their own fight.
Yeah, it's definitely relevant specifically for the other neurodegenerative diseases that you mentioned: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, Huntington's disease. The list goes on and on. Scientists are discovering more and more links than we ever previously realized between all these diseases. And so what you've got is the opportunity to galvanize not just the ALS or Parkinson's community in silos, but to get people together and really see that we're all sort of rowing in the same direction and we can help one another. That was one of Priscilla Chan's leading ideas, obviously, with Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, CZI, is to, have more open science and sharing of ideas to get us all towards progress and cures faster. So we're coming at it from the angle of ALS, but it really is broadly applicable to a lot of other things.
And what we find in the film or learn is that, and Brian discovered, is that there really were no protocols of how do you deal with this illness. And part of the reason, I think, is that it is such a fast progressing illness in many cases. Not everyone, but almost every case where, for instance, Brian was given 6 months to live initially. Now he's continued to live and do all the work that he's been doing for several years now. But it maybe partly for that reason, no one who gets the disease really understood, like, well, what do you do now? And so that's part of the thrust of what he's been doing, is trying to help people confront the illness and what do you do? And how important was it for you to sort of explain the realities of what it is like to live with an illness that's so devastating and want to do something to get into clinical trials if possible and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly important part of the story, and it's one of the things that's been intriguing and beautiful, but also really painful to watch, is going through this process, knowing that Brian and Sandra and the movement are fighting for federal dollars and research and to push the envelope and get things done faster, but also while he's dealing with this terrible physical decline of this disease and in real time. So I've never witnessed anything with more urgency in my life, not just Brian, but all of the community. And really, it stems from Brian and Sandra's love for one another. And, to think of the title, Love and Life, like, they do love one another, and they know that every family out there has that love for this person who's been diagnosed, and we all want to have more life together with our loved ones. And so really that's what it's about, is building this movement to accelerate progress, to keep people here longer, to improve the quality of life, and to unlock these scientific answers that can help people in so many ways.
And one of the key challenges, of course, is, as we see in the film, of just trying to get legislation passed that would allow people who are diagnosed with ALS to get disability benefits. Because normally that's a very long process. And it wouldn't be easy for whatever reason that one becomes disabled. But if your lifespan is looking like maybe 3 years or something, if you have to wait a year for Social Security disability benefits, this is critical. And Sandra and Brian and everyone they work with and others we see in the film were able to really move Congress very quickly to take action on that. And that is a huge undertaking and a huge victory for them.
Absolutely. They're amazing.
Yeah, because I think it's a lot of people don't understand that if you're fighting for your life and don't have much time, those benefits are critical. But as you see in the films, like Congress is a very slow moving vessel. They were able to get this, they set themselves a challenge that we want to get this legislation passed within a year, and they were able to do that. How do you think they were able to accomplish that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the movement, and they say the power of the patient, right? And everybody to know that you can make a difference if you go out there. And one of the things Brian says in the film is that any campaign is not about one person. It's about a bunch of people giving a lot of time or a little time or whatever they can towards the greater goal. And they've been able to galvanize not just patients and patient families, but other ALS organizations, like the Social Security Disability Act that you mentioned was done in partnership with a lot of organizations, specifically Team Gleason. Mm-hmm. Steve Gleason, obviously another very famous ALS advocate, who had said that he wanted nothing to do with legislation, and he told Brian, go get this bill passed, and Brian was like, okay, I've been challenged by Steve Gleason, I got to do it, right? But fortunately, by that time, IMALS had built up this army of advocates and they knew from Brian and Sandra's time in Washington, D.C., obviously on the campaigns and in the White House, they knew how to apply pressure in the right places in the political system to get change affected. It is not easy. It's very complicated, very difficult, but it's been a thing of beauty to see them do it.
They've been able to get way more funding for ALS research. There's an interesting part of the film. We talk about the ice bucket challenge that people may remember. This is in 2014, kind of a internet phenomenon, which did raise a lot of money, kind of a one-off thing, but through the efforts of IMALS and others connected with Brian and Sandra, they've just massively increased funding into research into ALS. What is the state of our understanding of ALS and clinical trials on that kind of thing? How much progress is being made on that front?
We're not doctors. We're
Right.
filmmakers. So I think that might be a little bit out of our depth. But, there is more money now going into research than there's ever been before. And, it will continue to have dividends, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things about approaching it from the federal government side of things is that you're able to create through legislation recurring funding. Ice Bucket Challenge was amazing. It did a lot, and it really raised awareness. But unfortunately, in some ways, that didn't last. A lot of people couldn't recall when IMALS did a poll early on, and many people couldn't recall why they dumped ice on their head. So yes, they did it, and they gave money, and not to take away from that in any way, but what you need is a sustained movement, and the federal dollars can really help make that happen on a recurring basis, so that the early science can get funded that can lead to these eventual trials and treatments and cures.
We see in the film other people who are diagnosed with ALS who've joined in this fight in other ways, sometimes sort of in league with Brian and Sandra, if you will, or perhaps on their own. Why was it important to you to have not just Brian and Sandra, as important as they are to the film, but also to have other people who are dealing with the illness to be part of this film?
Yeah, I think it's important to show that it really is a disease that attacks cross sections of people. It knows no race, gender, age. It is anybody's disease, so it's everybody's problem, as one of the physicians who comments in the film. And also, maybe there's a way for somebody to identify a little bit more with someone who's a military veteran, for example, like Juan Reyes, one of the guys who appears, or a mom who's lost her husband and now has these 3 kids, like Nicole Simbura. Like, there's so many different angles in it, and I felt like it was really important that we give people as many ways in as possible. Of course, Brian's the person that I know, but I didn't know anyone with ALS before it happened to Brian, right? So I think part of the point with that was to show that, hey, this could be anywhere. This could happen to anyone.
And as the title suggests, this is a love story, and I think is, in that respect, is universal. And to see the incredible love of Brian and Sandra is so moving, and I think that's important to balance that, because it's a tough issue, as you know, as filmmakers, to try to get people beyond maybe their discomfort with illness, and this is part of the way of doing that, of like everyone can identify with them, I think, of this challenge, and that they're raising 2 small kids in the face of this devastating illness. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the love story that's really at the center of the film.
Yeah, I mean, really, what I tell people is that this is the most uplifting film about terminal disease that you'll ever see, and that's what we set out to do. And I think we've really managed to do that, and in no small part because of that love that Brian and Sandra have, and that they demonstrate in ways big and small throughout the film, whether it's, making fun of each other at the oddest moments, that, when they're up at 11 at night trying to write a testimony that could be world changing, and they're, Sandra's making fun of Brian's dance moves with ALS, or whatever it is. I mean, it shows itself in ways large and small, and I think that makes it really accessible to people. And ultimately, that's what all of us have fallen in love with this process, is that relationship between them, and what it encapsulates, and what it has inspired with the people who have joined the movement and who see themselves in it in some small way. We all know what it's like to love someone, whether it's a parent or a child or a spouse, and to see the struggle that these 2 are facing, and yet keeping such a brave face and keeping such constructive strength and action in the face of that. It's something we all could learn from.
Well, congratulations on the film. It is For Love and Life, no ordinary campaign. We have been joined by the director, Christopher Burke, and producer, Tim Rummel. The film is on Prime Video. Thank you both so much for joining us on Contenders.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for having us.